High Admiral Vextera's crystalline tendrils quivered as she studied the holographic display before her. The data couldn't be correct. She'd ordered her science team to run the scans 3 times, but the results remained unchanged. The planet designated SK-291 in the Outer Rim wasn't just inhabited, it was home to an advanced civilization. Impossible, she whispered, her bioluminescent patterns flickering with agitation. The planet's surface gravity was 1.7 times galactic standard. Its atmosphere was a toxic soup of nitrogen and oxygen, with radiation levels that should have prevented complex life from evolving. The temperature swings between its seasons would shatter most known materials. Admiral, her second-in-command, Science Director Zen, floated into the command chamber. His gelatinous form rippled with excitement. The latest scans confirm artificial satellites in orbit. They're primitive by our standards, but they're definitely products of an industrial civilization. Vextera's tendrils coiled tightly against her crystalline body. In her 3 centuries of service to the Galactic Confederation, she'd never encountered anything like this. The Confederation had classified SK-291 as a Class 7 death world, making it one of the most inhospitable planets ever catalogued. The very idea of sapient life evolving there defied everything they knew about biological development. "Show me their population centers," she commanded. The hologram shifted, revealing sprawling cities scattered across continents. Some were built in valleys that regularly experienced devastating earthquakes. Others clung to coastlines battered by storms that could level mountains. A particularly large metropolis sat in a region that experienced temperature swings of over 60 degrees in a single planetary rotation. "How many?" she asked. "Current estimates suggest approximately 8 billion individuals," Zen reported, his translucent body pulsing with each word. "They appear to have achieved industrial civilization within the last 3 centuries, and their technological advancement is accelerating at an unprecedented rate. 8 billion. On a death world." The number seemed to mock everything the Confederation had established about habitable environments. Most Class 7 worlds were used for automated mining operations, with even the most hardened worker species requiring extensive protective equipment to survive for more than a few hours on the surface. "What do we know about their biology?" Zen projected a new set of images. "They're bipedal endotherms, carbon-based. Their bodies are supported by internal calcium structures, with a remarkably inefficient water-based cooling system. They appear to be persistence predators, capable of pursuing prey until it collapses from exhaustion." "Persistence predators?" Vextera's patterns flashed with disbelief. "In that gravity?" "Yes, Admiral. And there's more. They're omnivorous, able to process a wide variety of organic materials for sustenance. Their neural system shows signs of extreme plasticity, allowing them to adapt to new situations with remarkable speed. But most incredibly," Zen paused, his form rippling with what might have been awe, "they sleep." "All species rest, Director." "No, Admiral. They enter a state of partial consciousness for approximately 1/3 of their planetary rotation. They become completely vulnerable to predators or environmental threats. And yet, they not only survived, but became the dominant species on a world that should have killed them in their sleep." Vextera moved closer to the hologram, studying the beings that had achieved the impossible. They looked so fragile, their bodies protected by nothing more than a thin layer of skin and simple clothing. No natural armor, no redundant organs, no obvious defensive capabilities at all. "The Council must be informed," she decided. "This discovery changes everything we thought we knew about species development. Prepare a first contact team." The command chamber's alert system suddenly flared to life, bathing everything in pulsating red light. A new hologram materialized, showing a massive energy surge from the planet's surface. "Admiral." Zen's form rippled with alarm. "They've detected our presence. They're attempting to communicate." The energy signature resolved into a coherent transmission. Crude by Confederation standards, but clear enough. A face appeared in the hologram, one of the planet's inhabitants. The being's expression was curved upward at the edges in what their xenologists would later identify as a smile. "Greetings," the transmission began in surprisingly clear galactic standard. On behalf of humanity and the United Earth Government, we welcome you to Sol Space. We've been expecting you. Vextera's patterns froze in shock. They had not only detected the Confederation's cloaked observation vessels, but had also deciphered their communication protocols. This was supposed to be a primitive industrial civilization, yet they had casually bypassed some of the most sophisticated stealth technology in the galaxy. How, she demanded, broadcasting on the same frequency. The human's smile widened. Let's just say that when you grow up on a world that tries to kill you every day, you learn to pay attention to the smallest details. We've been watching you watch us for quite some time now. We thought it was only polite to let you finish your observations before saying hello. In that moment, Vextera realized that the Confederation's classification system was fundamentally flawed. They had categorized worlds based on their hostility to life, assuming that the most challenging environments would produce the simplest, most brutally adapted species. But these humans had done something entirely different. Instead of merely surviving their death world, they had learned to thrive on it. Each challenge had pushed them to become more adaptable, more innovative, more resilient. They hadn't just survived on a death world. They had taken everything their brutal home had thrown at them and turned it into advantages. And now they were reaching for the stars. Director Zen, she said quietly, update the classification of SK-291. And prepare the Council for a very interesting report. I believe we're about to learn that our understanding of what makes a species advanced may have been rather limited. As she watched the human's confident expression in the hologram, Vextera couldn't help but wonder what other impossibilities these Death World natives would prove wrong. Something told her this was just the beginning of a very long list. The stars had just become a much more interesting place. Dr. Sarah Chun suppressed a smile as she watched the alien scientists struggle with their protective suits. The Confederation delegation had insisted on wearing their environmental gear inside the Tokyo Research Center, despite her assurances that the building's atmosphere was perfectly safe for most carbon-based life forms. The suits are unnecessary, she explained again, gesturing to her own comfortable lab coat. We've adjusted the air pressure and composition to match Confederation standard levels. Science Director Zen's gelatinous form rippled within his containment suit. With respect, Doctor, your species evolved on a death world. Your definition of safe may differ significantly from ours. Sarah walked to the nearest monitoring station, pulling up environmental readings on the holographic display. Let me demonstrate something. She adjusted several settings, and the room's atmospheric pressure began to rise. This is what we consider a pleasant day for a beach vacation. The alien scientists' vital signs spiked as their instruments registered the change. Impossible, one of them exclaimed. That pressure would crush most sentient species. And yet, Sarah continued, reverting the settings, humans not only survive but routinely dive to even greater pressures for both work and recreation. Our bodies are remarkably adaptable. She led the delegation to the primary research bay, where a series of holographic displays showcased human biological data. When we received your classification system, we were quite surprised to learn that Earth was considered a death world. From our perspective, it's simply home. The alien scientists clustered around the displays, their various sensory organs focused intently on the data. Sarah had spent weeks preparing this presentation, knowing it would challenge everything they thought they knew about biological evolution. Let's start with something basic, she suggested, bringing up a simulation of human cellular structure. Our cells contain mitochondria, which we believe originated as separate organisms that formed a symbiotic relationship with our evolutionary ancestors. This gives us remarkable energy efficiency and adaptability. Fascinating, Zen commented, his form swirling with interest. But surely such complexity makes you more vulnerable to environmental changes? Sarah shook her head. Actually, it's quite the opposite. Human bodies are constantly adapting, even on a cellular level. We can acclimatize to extreme temperatures, varying atmospheric pressures, and different gravity conditions. What you see as devastating environmental challenges, we see as opportunities for growth. She switched the display to show human muscle and bone structure. Take our skeletal system, for instance. The more stress we put on our bones, the stronger they become. Our muscles work the same way, they grow and adapt to meet increasing challenges. One of the junior scientists, a crystalline being similar to High Admiral Vextera, raised an appendage. But such constant adaptation must consume enormous energy resources? That's where another of our impossible traits comes in, Sarah replied, bringing up new data. Human digestive systems can process an incredibly wide range of organic materials. We can derive nutrition from substances that would be toxic to most species. Some humans even deliberately consume capsaicin, a chemical compound that triggers pain receptors, for pleasure. The alien's vital signs spiked again at this revelation. Zen's containment suit actually backed away slightly. You intentionally consume pain-inducing substances for entertainment? Among other reasons, Sarah confirmed. It's part of what makes us unique. We don't just endure challenges, we actively seek them out. It's driven our evolution and our technological development. She moved to the final display, showing human neural patterns. But perhaps our most remarkable feature is this, our brains. The neural plasticity of human minds is unlike anything else you've encountered. We can learn, adapt, and overcome challenges not just through physical evolution, but through intellectual and cultural evolution as well. The data showed human brain activity during various tasks: problem-solving, creative thinking, emotional processing. When faced with an obstacle, we don't just try to overcome it. We study it, understand it, and often find ways to turn it to our advantage. That's how we survived our death world, by making its challenges into opportunities. Zen floated closer to the neural display, his scientific curiosity apparently overcoming his caution. This explains much about your technological development. Your species doesn't just adapt physically to challenges, you create solutions that bypass them entirely. Sarah nodded. Exactly. When we couldn't fly, we built aircraft. When we couldn't survive underwater, we created submarines. When our planet's resources grew scarce, we developed renewable technologies. Each challenge pushed us to become more innovative. She paused, considering her next words carefully. There's something else you should understand about humans. We have a saying, necessity is the mother of invention. The very conditions that made Earth a death world by your standards, they're what drove us to become who we are. The alien scientists were quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Finally, Zen spoke. Dr. Chin, when we first discovered your world, we thought we had found an impossibility, life thriving where it should not exist. Now I realize we found something far more significant. We found a species that doesn't just survive impossibilities, you redefine them. Sarah smiled. Director Zen, you haven't seen anything yet. Would you like to know what happens when humans get really creative? The scientist's vital signs jumped again, but this time, Sarah noted, it wasn't from fear. It was from excitement. They were beginning to understand that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their ability to survive on a death world, it was their ability to turn every challenge into an opportunity for growth. And as she prepared to show them the next phase of human innovation, she knew their definition of impossible was about to change yet again. The emergency alert pierced through the Confederation's Central Command like a plasma burst. High Admiral Vextera's crystalline form vibrated with tension as the tactical display revealed another colony world going dark. The Nexari were no longer just raiding outposts, they were systematically destroying entire settlements. Third attack this cycle, Commander James Rodriguez noted grimly. The human military advisor stood beside her, his dark eyes fixed on the expanding zone of darkness that marked Nexari-controlled space. Their pattern is evolving. Vextera's bioluminescent patterns pulsed with frustration. The Confederation's finest warriors have failed to even slow their advance. The Nexari's adaptive shielding makes our weapons virtually useless, and their bioengineered troops seem immune to conventional tactics. The human's expression remained steady, but something flickered in his eyes, not fear, but calculation. Tell me about your elite force's last engagement. Zen, who had become the unofficial liaison between human and Confederation military forces, brought up the battle footage. The hologram showed the pride of the Confederation fleet, crystalline warships that could withstand the heart of a star, being systematically torn apart by writhing, organic-looking Nexari vessels. Our strongest warriors, from worlds with twice standard gravity, couldn't breach their lines, Zen explained. The Nexari adapt to every strategy we employ. They're like a virus, mutating to overcome any defense. A virus, Rodriguez repeated softly. That's interesting. You know, back on Earth, we've been fighting viruses since before we knew what they were. We learned something important. Sometimes the strongest defense isn't the best defense. Vextera's patterns shifted to confusion. Explain. Rodriguez walked into the hologram, manipulating the display with practiced ease. Your warriors are impressive. Strong, heavily armored, nearly indestructible. But that's exactly what the Nexari expect. They've evolved to counter overwhelming force with even greater force. He paused the footage at a crucial moment. Look here, your ship's energy weapons bounce off their shields, making them stronger. Classic adaptive defense. Then we are doomed, one of the council members declared. If strength cannot prevail. Who said anything about strength being the only way to win? Rodriguez interrupted. The human's lips curved into what Vextera had learned was a dangerous smile. On Earth, we have a saying, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. He gestured, and the hologram shifted to display a new tactical overlay. The Nexari are adapting to your strongest attacks, so let's try something they won't expect. Humanity hasn't survived this long by just being strong. We've learned to be clever, to find weaknesses, to adapt faster than our opponents. The human brought up detailed scans of Nexari ship architecture. See these organic components in their hull structure? They're not just armor. They're part of a living system. And living systems have basic needs that can't be adapted away. They need energy. They need to process waste. They need to maintain homeostasis. Understanding began to dawn in Zen's gelatinous form. You're suggesting we attack their biological functions rather than their defensive systems? Exactly, Rodriguez confirmed. But more than that, I'm suggesting we change the entire way we fight them. The Confederation's military doctrine is based on overwhelming force, being stronger, tougher, more resilient. But humans? We're used to being the underdogs. We've spent our entire history learning how to defeat enemies that were bigger, stronger, or more numerous than us. He expanded the tactical display, showing multiple simulation scenarios. Small, fast ships instead of massive battlecruisers. Hit-and-run tactics instead of direct confrontation. Biological countermeasures instead of brute force. We don't need to overpower their adaptations. We need to make those adaptations work against them. Vextera studied the humans' proposals. They seemed almost primitive compared to the Confederation's advanced warfare doctrine, yet there was an elegance to their simplicity. Your species would be willing to assist us in this fight? Rodriguez's expression hardened. Admiral, the Nexari are threatening innocent lives and destroying entire worlds. If there's one thing humans understand, it's standing up to bullies who think might makes right. We've spent our entire history proving that determination, ingenuity, and the will to protect others can overcome any advantage an enemy might have. He turned to face the assembled Confederation leadership. You've seen our world. You've studied our biology. You know what we've survived. Now let us show you what humans can do when we have something worth fighting for. The command chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The Confederation had classified Earth as a death world, assuming its inhabitants must be simple, brutish creatures to survive there. Instead, those harsh conditions had forged something unprecedented, a species that thrived on overcoming impossible odds. Very well, Vextera decided, her patterns glowing with renewed purpose. Commander Rodriguez, you have the Confederation's authorization to implement your strategic proposals. But I must ask, given the Nexari's demonstrated ability to adapt, what makes you confident this approach will succeed? The human's smile returned, fiercer this time. Because, Admiral, adaptation goes both ways. The Nexari evolved to counter whatever hurts them? Fine. But they've never faced an enemy that considers adaptation itself a weapon. They've never fought humans before. As emergency alerts continued to flash across the tactical display, Rodriguez began outlining his battle plans. And for the first time since the Nexari threat emerged, Vextera felt something she hadn't expected: hope. The Confederation had been fighting to prove their strength. But perhaps what they really needed was to learn from a species that had turned adversity itself into an advantage. The coming battle would not be won by the strongest warriors. It would be won by those who understood that true strength often came in unexpected forms. And humans, it seemed, were masters of the unexpected. Captain Maya Patel pressed herself against the organic-looking wall of the Nexari vessel, her combat suit sensors feeding constant data to her neural interface. Behind her, Krax, her crystalline Confederation partner, was trying to process what he'd just witnessed. "You deliberately let them detect us," he whispered, his crystalline structure vibrating with a mixture of disbelief and growing understanding. Maya nodded, checking the small device she'd attached to the ship's hull. Sometimes the best way to hide is to be seen exactly where they expect you to be. The device pulsed once, releasing its payload of engineered bacteria into the Nexari ship's living components. "They're so focused on our decoy team making a loud entrance at the main breach point, they won't notice what we're really doing." The Joint Human Confederation Strike Team had been assembled just 3 weeks ago, after Commander Rodriguez's strategic proposals were approved. Most of the Confederation warriors had initially balked at what they saw as primitive tactics. But now, watching the Nexari's mighty defenses being systematically undermined by human ingenuity, even the skeptics were starting to understand. Multiple hostile signatures approaching the primary breach, Maya's neural link crackled with Lieutenant Sarah Chen's voice, Dr. Chen's daughter, who had inherited her mother's understanding of xenobiology and applied it to warfare. They're responding exactly as predicted. Biomechanical defenses are diverting 82% of resources to counter our apparent main thrust. Maya allowed herself a small smile. The Nexari's greatest strength, their ability to rapidly adapt and reinforce against threats, was becoming their weakness. They were so focused on adapting to the obvious danger that they were ignoring the real threat. "Status of the bacterial payload," she subvocalized. "Spreading through their biological systems," Sarah reported. "Their adaptive immune response is exactly what we wanted. They're making themselves more vulnerable with every defense they evolve." Krax's crystalline form shimmered with something approaching awe. "You're using their own adaptation against them. The more they try to fight the engineered bacteria, the more they optimize their biological systems to be vulnerable to the second-stage payload," Maya confirmed. "Sometimes the best way to defeat an adaptive enemy is to make them adapt in exactly the wrong direction." The Nexari ship's internal lighting suddenly shifted to a deeper purple, indicating their defense systems were reaching maximum alert status. "Right on schedule. All teams, execute Phase 2, Maya commanded. Throughout the massive vessel, other human Confederation pairs were placing similar devices at key points. The Nexari's internal sensors would detect them, of course. That was part of the plan. "I still don't understand why we're using such small explosive charges," Krax noted, watching Maya place another device. "The hull regenerates too quickly for minor breaches to matter." "Who said anything about trying to breach the hull?" Maya replied, checking the deployment timer. "Remember what Commander Rodriguez said about human hunting techniques? Sometimes you don't need to be stronger than your prey. You just need to understand how they'll react when they're scared." The first charges detonated, creating dozens of small breaches across the ship's surface. The Nexari defenses responded instantly, biological material flowing to seal the wounds. Maya's neural interface lit up with data as sensors tracked the movement of internal resources. "They're responding to multiple minor threats simultaneously," Sarah reported. "Cellular repair mechanisms are operating at 97% capacity. Their adaptive systems are fully engaged in optimizing their regeneration rate." "Now," Maya commanded. Throughout the ship, the second-stage bacterial payload activated. The engineered organisms, which had been spreading through the Nexari's biological systems, suddenly began producing a specific protein sequence. In their desperate attempts to adapt to the minor breaches, the Nexari's living ship components had optimized themselves to be perfectly vulnerable to this final attack. The effect was devastating. The ship's biological systems, pushed to their adaptive limits, began to break down. What should have been minor damage cascaded into catastrophic failure as the very adaptations that made the Nexari so formidable turned against them. "Multiple system failures detected," Sarah announced, her voice tight with controlled excitement. Their adaptive responses are accelerating the breakdown. Time to complete biological system failure. 3 minutes. Krax's crystalline form vibrated with realization. You never needed to overpower their defenses. You just needed to understand how they worked and use that knowledge against them. Maya nodded, already moving toward their extraction point. Humanity learned long ago that the most dangerous predator isn't always the strongest. It's the one that understands its prey's behavior and uses that understanding to its advantage. As they made their way back to their stealth shuttle, the massive Nexary vessel began to drift, its once formidable adaptive systems now turned into instruments of its own destruction. Throughout Confederation space, similar scenes were playing out as other human-led teams implemented the same strategy against different targets. Your species, Krax said as they watched the Nexary ship's biomechanical components continue to break down, you truly are Deathworlders. But not in the way we thought. You don't just survive through strength, you survive through understanding. Through turning every challenge, every limitation, into an advantage. Maya checked her neural interface, confirming that all team members were safely evacuating. That's what living on Earth taught us, Krax. When every day is a challenge, you learn to be creative. You learn that sometimes the smartest way to win isn't to be the strongest, it's to be the most adaptable. As their shuttle accelerated away from the dying Nexary vessel, Maya knew this was just the beginning. The enemy would study this defeat, try to adapt to prevent it from happening again. But that was fine. Humans were good at adaptation too. After all, they'd had plenty of practice on their death world. The Confederation war room buzzed with an energy high Admiral Vextera had never experienced in her centuries of service. Holographic displays showed dozens of successful operations against the Nexary, each led by human Confederation teams. But what truly fascinated her was watching the humans work. Dr. Sarah Chen and Commander Rodriguez stood at the central tactical display, surrounded by a diverse group of human specialists. They weren't just military personnel. There were artists, musicians, athletes, and even a chef among them. The Confederation leaders had initially questioned this unusual assembly, but they'd learned to stop doubting human methods. The Nexary have altered their ship's biological components, Sarah explained, manipulating the holographic data. They're trying to counter our engineered bacteria. But look at this pattern. She highlighted a complex sequence of biological adaptations. A young human woman, a musician of all things, stepped forward. It's like a rhythm, she observed, her fingers moving as if playing an invisible instrument. Their adaptations follow a mathematical progression, similar to a musical sequence. If we can predict the pattern, we can compose a counter-melody, Rodriguez finished, understanding lighting his features. Dr. Chin, can we engineer our next batch of countermeasures to exploit this rhythm? The discussion that followed would have baffled Vextera's younger self. The humans effortlessly blended concepts from music theory, biological engineering, and military strategy. They saw patterns where the Confederation's best analysts saw only chaos. Admiral, Zen's gelatinous form rippled with excitement as he approached her observation post. The latest reports from the front lines are extraordinary. The Nexary have lost 37% of their occupied territory in just 2 standard cycles. Vextera's patterns pulsed with satisfaction, but she wasn't surprised. She'd been watching the humans closely, learning to understand their unique advantages. Tell me, Director, what do you see when you observe their planning sessions? Zen focused his sensory organs on the animated group of humans. Chaos, he admitted. Brilliant chaos. They integrate concepts that should have no logical connection. They make intuitive leaps that defy our most sophisticated predictive algorithms. And their emotional responses, which we once considered a weakness, have become one of their greatest strengths, Vextera finished. Watch. Below them, a tactical officer had just reported a Nexary attack on a civilian settlement. The humans' emotional responses were immediate and visible, increased heart rates, elevated stress hormones, facial expressions displaying what they called anger. But instead of clouding their judgment, these emotions seemed to sharpen it. Emotional investment, Rodriguez was explaining to a group of Confederation warriors, gives us an edge. When we fight for something we care about, we push harder. We think faster. We refuse to accept failure as an option. One of the crystalline warriors shifted uncertainly. But emotions are unpredictable. They cannot be controlled or quantified. Exactly, a human psychological warfare specialist interjected. And that's precisely why they're so valuable against an enemy like the Nexari. You can't quantify or predict human emotional responses, which means they can't adapt to them. Every time they think they understand how we'll react, we surprise them. The evidence was undeniable. Human strike teams consistently outperformed pure Confederation units, not despite their emotional responses, but because of them. They made creative decisions in combat that no logical analysis could have predicted. They formed deep bonds with their Confederation partners, improving unit cohesion in ways that transcended species barriers. Even their physical limitations had proven advantageous. The humans' need for regular sleep had initially seemed like a weakness until they demonstrated how their dreams could generate creative solutions to tactical problems. Their comparatively fragile bodies had forced them to develop tactics that emphasized intelligence over brute force. "Look at this," Sarah called out, drawing everyone's attention to a new dataset. The Nexari are trying to adapt to human unpredictability by becoming more unpredictable themselves. But in doing so, they're making their patterns even more recognizable to human intuition. The musician nodded enthusiastically. They're like an amateur trying to play jazz. The harder they try to be random, the more they fall into recognizable patterns. Vexterra watched as the humans began composing their next strategy, blending art and science in ways that would have seemed absurd just months ago. They didn't just think outside conventional boundaries. They seemed unable to recognize that such boundaries existed at all. "We were wrong," she said quietly to Zen. "When we classified Earth as a death world, we thought we were identifying a planet that should have been too hostile for advanced life. Instead, we found a crucible that forged something unprecedented, a species that turns adversity into advantage, that finds strength in what others see as weakness." Below them, the humans continued their planning, their voices filled with determination and hope. They weren't just fighting the Nexari, they were rewriting the rules of warfare, of adaptation, of what was possible. "The Nexari adapt to survive," Zen observed. "But humans adapt to thrive. They don't just overcome challenges, they transform them into opportunities." Perhaps that is the true legacy of their death world origin. As if to emphasize his point, a cheer went up from the planning group. Someone had just proposed a particularly brilliant solution, though Vexterra couldn't begin to understand the complex web of music theory, bacterial genetics, and combat tactics that had produced it. And that, she realized, was humanity's greatest contribution to the war effort. They hadn't just brought new tactics or technologies. They had brought a fundamentally different way of thinking, of feeling, of approaching problems. They had shown the Confederation that true adaptation wasn't about becoming stronger or tougher. It was about finding new ways to transform challenges into advantages. The war wasn't over, but its outcome was no longer in doubt. The Nexari were fighting an enemy they couldn't understand, couldn't predict, and therefore couldn't defeat. They were fighting humans. And humans, as the galaxy was learning, had a habit of doing the impossible. The Galactic Council chamber had changed since High Admiral Vexterra's first report about Earth. The reinforced flooring remained, but now it accommodated more than just the massive crystalline warriors of heavy gravity worlds. Humans moved freely among the alien delegates, their presence a living reminder that strength came in many forms. Dr. Sarah Chin stood at the podium, addressing the assembled representatives of a transformed confederation. Behind her, a holographic display showed the last Nexari stronghold surrendering to a joint human confederation fleet. "The war is over," she announced, her voice carrying the weight of hard-won victory. "But its lessons will reshape our understanding of what makes a species truly advanced." Commander Rodriguez, now Admiral Rodriguez, stood beside her. The human military leader's presence among the Confederation's highest ranks would have been unthinkable a year ago. Now it seemed inevitable. "We came to you as curiosities," he addressed the council, "inhabitants of a world you classified as too hostile for sophisticated life. You saw our survival as an impossibility. Today, we stand here having helped defeat an enemy that threatened the entire galaxy, not through overwhelming force, but through understanding, adaptation, and cooperation. Vextera's crystalline form vibrated with pride as she took her place at the podium. Her patterns glowed as she activated the central display, showing Earth in all its deadly beauty. The Confederation's classification system was based on a fundamental misconception, she declared. We believed that the most challenging environments would produce the simplest, most brutally adapted species. Earth proved us wrong. It forged something unprecedented, a species that views challenges not as obstacles, but as catalysts for growth. The display shifted, showing scenes from the war. Human Confederation teams working in perfect harmony. Creative solutions that had turned the tide of battle. Moments of cooperation that transcended biological differences. The humans didn't just survive their death world, Vextera continued. They learned from it. Every challenge their planet presented became a lesson. Every hardship became an opportunity for innovation. They developed not just physical adaptations, but cultural, technological, and psychological tools that we never imagined possible. Dr. Chin stepped forward again. More importantly, we learned from each other. The Confederation taught us about the vastness of space, about technologies we hadn't dreamed of. And in return, we showed you that what you saw as our weaknesses, our emotions, our dreams, our constant drive to question and change, could be powerful advantages. The Chamber's holographic system activated, displaying data from hundreds of worlds. Research projects, cultural exchanges, technological innovations, all born from the collaboration between humans and the Confederation species. The Nexari believed that adaptation meant becoming stronger, more resilient, more deadly, Rodriguez explained. They couldn't understand that true adaptation is about more than just survival. It's about finding new ways to thrive, about turning challenges into opportunities, about seeing possibilities where others see only obstacles. A new delegate raised their appendage, a representative from one of the Confederation's soft worlds that had once been considered too gentle to produce significant innovations. How do we move forward from here? How do we apply these lessons? Sarah smiled. We've already begun. Look at the joint research teams developing new technologies based on human creativity and Confederation expertise. Look at the cultural exchange programs helping species understand different ways of thinking. Look at the military academies where strength and intelligence are finally recognized as equal partners. Vextera activated the final display, a map of the known galaxy, but not one showing political boundaries or military strengths. Instead, it showed connections, collaborations, the flow of ideas and innovations between worlds. We propose a new classification system, she announced. Not one that ranks worlds by their hostility, but one that recognizes the unique contributions each environment brings to our shared civilization. Earth isn't a death world, it's an crucible world, a place where adversity forges innovation. The chamber erupted in discussion, but not in the fearful way it once had when faced with change. The humans had taught them that change wasn't just inevitable, it was valuable. The stars were always within our reach, Rodriguez concluded, looking out at the assembled delegates. We just had to learn to reach for them together, each bringing our own strengths to the challenge. Humanity's gift wasn't showing you how to survive a death world, it was showing you that every world, every species, every challenge contains the seeds of its own transcendence. As the council session ended, Vextera watched humans and aliens mingling freely, sharing ideas, building the future. Her patterns glowed with the realization that this was just the beginning. The galaxy had learned that true strength wasn't about being the toughest, the strongest, or the most adaptable. It was about understanding that every perceived weakness could become a strength, that every challenge could become an opportunity. The stars had indeed become a much more interesting place. And somewhere out there, on a planet that should have been too hostile for sophisticated life, a new generation of humans was looking up at those same stars, dreaming of what impossibilities they would prove wrong next. After all, that's what humans did best. They turned impossibilities into stepping stones toward a future that grew brighter with every challenge overcome, every boundary pushed, every new horizon reached. The Death World had given birth to life's greatest champions, not through strength alone, but through the ultimate adaptation, the ability to turn adversity itself into advantage. And in doing so, they had taught the galaxy that the true measure of advancement wasn't surviving against the odds, it was learning to thrive because of them.